The present purpose is an introduction to Evan Shoshan's Concordance. While it can be challenging to use at first, this concordance offers significant opportunity for exegesis of the Hebrew Bible. At the beginning, it's very helpful to use the card with abbreviations for terms and signs to find one's way through the different entries. These include a number of different abbreviations that I'll highlight a couple of here. Notice the abbreviation for the divine name. Notice the abbreviation for proper nouns. It's also worth noting the way that Hebrew verbal stems are abbreviated, and certain biblical books, especially in the Hebrew version of Evan Shoshan. We remember that Hebrew verb stems, or binyanim, are listed according to the word pa'al. And so Evan Shoshan uses these abbreviations for kal, nifal, piel, and so forth. And again, remember, this check mark is an abbreviation. It chops off the rest of the word. So when we see heat, this is hitpa'el, chopping off the rest of the word. So there's the abbreviation for the hitpa'el stem throughout Evan Shoshan. Here's the beginning of a very long entry for the word amar, to speak or to say. The entry begins with a list of derivatives, that is, other words related to amar. Next comes a series of definitions, and these are given in modern Hebrew. This is followed by a list of synonyms or near terms. And then finally we see that the entry itself begins with a list of numbered terms or phrases with scripture references for each one, and it follows the different forms of the verb broken up form by form. So there's a number of ways that one can use this, but one of those is to look up other terms in the target with the same form and binyanim as the target verse. Here's a close-up of the derivatives that appear at the beginning of the entry. So first we have the kal form, and then it lists the infinitive construct, the nifal, the hitpa'el, hifil, and so on. Next comes the list of definitions, and again, these are given in modern Hebrew, so many times it's worth just looking through for the person that only knows biblical Hebrew and seeing what glosses are also similar to glosses that we know from biblical Hebrew. Next in the entry is the synonyms, or keruvim, near words. So these are other terms which have similar sorts of ideas that one can also look at in the Hebrew Scriptures, like to speak, or to tell, or to command. The use of synonyms can be very helpful when trying to determine why use this word, not another word. And that's true both of prose, but especially of poetry. Of course, for something serious, it's worthwhile to compare the synonym list in the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology and Exegesis. Now, that's a little bit cumbersome because of using transliteration rather than using the Hebrew words. But if you get used to it, this is a very nice complement to Evan Shoshan's list of synonyms, can be very helpful for studies. Next is collocations. And these can be very helpful because it shows when a word, in this case amar, is used with another word. Now in the case with le or el, that is to say to, there is not a list of the different entries. Rather, there is the term many readings or many verses. There's just too many to list in that case. However, if one were to study something a little different, it could be very helpful. For example, to say in his heart, that is, if one were studying interior monologue, where one thinks or says in his heart, or says in his heart, or he says in his heart, and so on. That is, these are all ways of one thinking or talking to oneself. And here we have a very reasonable number of entries with the explicit notation in the Hebrew text for interior monologue. For example, if we look at 1204, or entries 23, 95, and 96, these are each from Deuteronomy, chapters 7, 8, and 9, and these show us a series of questions relative to the challenges that are expected when the people get into the promised land. If one will say in one's heart, and then talks about the problem that one would face. Or entry number 2769, this is when Abraham appears before the Lord during the sign of the circumcision, Genesis 17, and he speaks to himself because he's a little bit befuddled by what the Lord has said. Or in 2770, that entry refers to Esau in speaking to himself. So these collocations can be very helpful to narrow down an area of study, even in a very long and complicated entry like Amar. Again, when we come up to the numbered entries themselves, we notice that there is the scripture reference of each one listed. There's a short contextual phrase related to each entry, and the entry follows the forms of the term. So when we look up a term, we can easily compare it to all of the other uses in the Hebrew Bible, which have the same binyan and form as the term we're working on, whether it's participle, infinitive construct, and whatnot. We can work through an example using the first root form of chayil. Now, when we focus on the definitions given here, they're in modern Hebrew, but we can recognize that there are a number of definitions that use strength, just like ko and oz, or a number that use army or military, like tzava. So many times, even knowing biblical Hebrew is adequate to get a start in using the groupings of the terms that one finds in the beginning, that is, by definition. Next, there's a very long list of different collocations, and each subgrouping begins with the horizontal line indicating a subgrouping of collocations. So in this case, we have some with adjectives and whatnot, like great chayil, and then we have some with persons and things. And we'll focus on this for our work at the moment. So if we were doing work on a chayil woman, that is, a woman of chayil, an excellent woman, or a woman of virtue, or a woman of strength, however we want to put that, we notice that there are only a few references. So normally, chayil isn't a kind of a word we would see with woman, but there are 3 references, and so that's noteworthy, over and against the term used with man and the like, or strong warrior or son, and other kinds of collocations. But we'll focus on the excellent woman, or the virtuous woman, or the woman of valor. And here we have entries in 34, 35, and 38. So we'll compare those 3 entries. So we find the entries, entry 34, 35, and 38. And we can easily compare them together. And in 34 we see, a woman of valor, she is a crown to her master or her husband. And then number 35 is a woman of valor. Then it's a question, who can find such a woman? Now both of these are from Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 12 and Proverbs 31. Our other entry is from the book of Ruth, chapter 3, verse 11, where Boaz is in dialogue with Ruth, and he says, for he knows, that is, a person knows, and here he's speaking about the persons in the gate of his people, that a woman of valor are you. So here, this helps us see that this use, referring to Ruth, is very similar and reminds us of the wisdom books that speak on 2 occasions very directly of a woman of valor, speaking of the excellent woman or woman wisdom. So this comparison helps us to see this striking use of a characteristic of Chayil that Boaz says to her. Now it's also worth comparing the other use in Ruth chapter 2, where here we have spoken of Boaz. He is a man of mighty valor. So here we have quite a couple then. Both are Chayil people. And of course, in Boaz's case, his name is a play off of the word strong, Boaz. Now, I'm aware that when one first uses Evan Shoshan, it can be very daunting. However, there's several kinds of helps it can give, and it's especially useful even in the age of computer indexes and databases. Evan Shoshan still has a strong place and can help the Bible exegete even in ways that are difficult to do in a computer. One of those, again, to summarize, is synonyms. Why this term and not that? Looking at the synonyms and comparing the other entry in Evan Shoshan and or a lexicon is especially helpful. Collocations is super helpful because even a person very adept at using a computer program with Hebrew databases may not always know the right question, whereas some of the work is prearranged at the beginning of the entries for Evan Shoshan to see when terms are used together. And then again, comparing all uses of a verb in a certain binyan or form. These are 3 ways that Evan Shoshan's Concordance can help us with particular exegetical issues we have when we study the Scriptures. 2 final notes. The version of the book published by Baker in the 1980s offers the Bible references in English, which is somewhat helpful, and that edition also comes with a short guide in a pocket in the front or back, which introduces the concordance.